Hey legends, welcome back to the I just did an Automobilista 2 review and more people saw it than I expected, so I wish I'd spent more time on it corner. We've got a big one today. I've really been looking forward to doing this ever since AMS2 launched into early access. With the release of Reiza's track pack, we're uniquely positioned to be able to do a proper A to B comparison of rFactor 2 and AMS2. Using identical track models and similar class cars, we can accurately compare the physics models and overall feeling of both titles. This is special because the consensus in the professional GT and Formula racing world is that rFactor Pro is the current gold standard in training drivers for real racing, and rFactor 2 is based on a similar physics framework. This means that we can compare the new Automobilista 2 directly to the reigning king of realism. We're going to take Virginia International Raceway and Imola, driving both lightly modified cars and historical F1 races to get a feel for both low downforce, low power to weight, and high downforce, high power to weight ratio cars, as well as how they handle tracks that are either bumpy or flat. Just before we move on to the laps, let me remind you to hit subscribe if you enjoy sim racing content and want to support the channel. First up is rFactor 2 at Virginia International using the BMW M2 CS. This is the closest thing we have in rFactor's newer content to a regular road car. The first thing that strikes you when playing RF2 is the amount of detail and the force feedback. There is a lot of road noise and detail even on the straights. Coming up on the curbs, the wheel really jolts around to let you know it. The game very much favouring trail braking into apexes and gradually accelerating out. Since this is a lumbering, slower car, we sometimes have to throw it around a little more than would be ideal, but even so it always remains very much within the realm of our control, with the force feedback clearly signalling what's going on under the tyres and whether or not we have grip to spare. This car also has a nice ABS effect in the wheel under heavy braking, which I know has been a contentious point with people in the past who claim ABS is only felt through the pedals. While I agree that it is majorly felt through the brake pedal in real life, if you've ever kicked it in, you'll also notice that it transfers lesser pulses through the car's entire chassis and can resultingly be felt everywhere. The wheel effect helps emulate that and makes it much easier to brake on the limit. The physics engine and force feedback overall really give you a great sense of the weight of what you're driving and how to keep it on the limit. In my experience, the skills learned in this game often translate over to real-life driving. Now we have the Lancer Evo 10 at Virginia International on AMS2. The first thing that strikes you about this game immediately after RF2 is the lack of finer detail in the force feedback. The straights generally feel dead other than significant road undulations. Corner entry is also very different, with RF2 favouring gentle, precise trail braking and easing into the throttle past apexes. AMS2's model has a tendency to bring the rear out very easily and appears to favour a more on-the-throttle, power oversteer style driving model. This connects back to what we said in the AMS2 review about the game's tendency to slide cars. The car feels very lumbering and heavy, and the game does a good job translating that to you with its feeling. The sensation of weight transfer is well rendered. On the whole, there is a greater emphasis on macro details, whereas in rFactor the emphasis is on both micro and macro. You can tell that underlying all of this is a phenomenally capable physics engine. Much like in rFactor, you can feel the tyre deformation and undulations underneath the car in a way that games such as Assetto Corsa simply don't render at all. It's a very engaging physics model, even if it may not be entirely true to life, and there is a tremendous sense of dynamism to it. You can feel downforce kick in on straights and let the car's self-aligning torque straighten it out during slides. One of the most engaging aspects of it is sustained high G corners on bumpy tracks and high downforce cars. You can literally feel the opposing antagonistic elements of physics fighting one another in order to maintain some equilibrium of grip. It should be noted that I managed to get the full laps of both cars within 30 milliseconds of one another. It was critical to ensure similar performances for a fair test. Yes, the two cars do have some differing characteristics. The Lancer is looser in turns, making up for it with more horsepower down the straights, while the BMW is more solidly balanced but lacking in raw horsepower. That said, in the end, their differences meet in the middle and they achieve remarkably similar lap times. Before we do a recap and summary of the physics differences, let's take a look at how each game handles Formula 1 cars at Imola. So, here we are in rFactor 2 in the McLaren MP4/13 at Imola. Firstly, allow me to apologise for my ineptitude at driving this course. I only learnt it the other day, and open wheels at this performance level are a new experience for me. It goes without saying that this track and car combo was something I found remarkably difficult. Yet as always in rFactor 2, tremendously satisfying to put together as well. Any little mistake would send the car flying to a point where after a few dozen laps I developed the ability to feather all my controls like I was driving around a portable shop full of fine china. The curbs and their rumble strips were relentless, and any deviation from the intended line would have them suck the car in and pull me off the course. The anti-cut on curbs would unsettle the car and cause it spinning in a flash. Any surface change was immensely noticeable, often resulting in handling deviation, immediately followed by lots of spinning. It gave me a greater respect for the sort of grueling work it would have been driving an F1 car in the late 90s. Given the amount of times I spun and locked the wheels, I must say that the rendering of tyre flat spots in RF2 is very impressive and very noticeable through the force feedback. Alongside this, it must be said that the high downforce made turning the wheel a challenge even with the forces turned down. When a sim dispenses with player hand-holding in order to render a more realistic driving experience, you generally know you're onto a winner. Jumping into AMS2 now on the same track with the Formula V10 Gen 2. The first thing that strikes you once again is the comparative lack of fine detail through the wheel. Curbs almost feel like they're just part of the tarmac, with none of the terror on the rumble strip that you get in RF2. You can simply just plant the entire car in it without worry, and brake or accelerate hard without fearing immediate spin. By this point, after driving RF2 for so long, I was extremely paranoid with this track and car combo, so I needed a few laps to build my courage up. Overall, it's a far easier experience than AMS2, with the handling model being much more forgiving to both running far onto curbs as well as overturning or over-accelerating. One of the most notable differences I came to grips with, however, given how often I got the pleasure of flying off the track, is that the off-road handling in RF2 is far more believable. Going onto the grass in AMS2 is like having tiny explosives randomly going off under the wheels. The car bounces around like it's on a test track. The sand traps in particular were far more believable in rFactor, causing the car to actually become bogged down and forcing a restart. The force feedback felt very vague on this car and made it difficult to know what was going on under the wheels. Compared to RF2, the experience felt more dead and less interactive, albeit fun and more forgiving in a way that Simcade titles often are. There's also no flat spot modelling that can be felt in AMS2's tyre model. So, that covers the impressions of driving laps in both titles. To summarise it, as mentioned in our AMS2 review, if rFactor 2's handling could be considered 95% of the way to real life, AMS is more like 80 to 85% at present. One of the important points that should be raised is that going from RF2 to AMS2, the skills and adaptability gained in rFactor apply to AMS. If you learn a circuit in rFactor, you can boot up AMS and come to grips with it fairly fast. Conversely, however, if you learn a track and circuit in AMS, then go to rFactor, it's much harder to adjust. There is quite simply a lot more going on with the physics model in rFactor. You can feel all those little unquantifiable details which contribute to the sense that you were really there, taking those corners at the limit. It should be said that overall, rFactor 2 is a harder game to drive effectively in, while AMS2, even with its somewhat incomplete and unpolished physics model, is still extremely fun to play. Given that it's just early access, it shows tremendous potential and above all has come out swinging as a very fun and engaging game to play. In spite of all the things I've said which might paint RF2 as a clear winner, there is something ridiculously engaging about AMS2 from an immersion standpoint. Perhaps it's the dynamic weather model and the time of day change being so impressive, or the dynamism in the physics model, accurate or no. But loading up a race against the AI is just simply fun, and isn't that why we buy games? So, in totality, if I were looking at an interim solution to train myself to be a race driver, I'd be practicing in rFactor 2, without a doubt. But if I just wanted to load up a race against a few AI at Brands Hatch, crank time acceleration to 60 times, perhaps throw in a quick weather change and just kick back and have some fun wrangling a car around a bumpy track, well, then I'd do it in AMS too. I hope you guys found that fun and informative. If you liked it, make sure to subscribe and hit like. If you disliked it, make sure to smash dislike twice, show me who's boss. And until next time, I'll catch you guys later.